not one for yes.
Hi, I'm Lil.
And I'm Fitz.
And you're listening to episode 2 of Knock Once for Yes. We're back with your monthly dose of paranormal banter and spooky stories.
We hope you enjoyed episode 1. If you did, please remember to subscribe and don't forget to share with anyone else you know with a predilection for the paranormal.
I like it. So what have we got coming up on today's show, Fitz?
Okay, well, coming up on today's show, we have the story of a haunted bath from Robin Northampton. We have some haunted battlefield stories and a couple of creepy premonitions that came true.
Ooh.
But first, what's pinged off on the paranormal radar this month?
Well, what's pinged off on the paranormal radar this month is Pontefract.
Cakes?
No, poltergeists. We've been checking out the Black Monk House poltergeist case. It's kind of had a recent upsurgence in popularity and media coverage. It kind of reminds me of the Enfield poltergeist case, which most people have heard of. It's a case that happened in the 70s where a family experienced quite intense paranormal activity. And this is quite similar. It happened in the 60s, so it's an old case. And the family that were living in the Black Monk House in Pontefract in the 60s had some intense poltergeist activity. What's different about this case is that it's suddenly popped up again in media coverage and been investigated by paranormal investigators currently, because the house is still open and you are able to go in there and investigate. In fact, there are groups that do public investigations there, so you can pay and you could stay the night and do your own ghost investigation. Ooh. It's very cool, actually. So yeah, really what makes it a current case is the fact that there is still new evidence coming out, and it's all very interesting.
What I found interesting was the fact that, like you said, with the Enfield haunting, which is perhaps the more well-known one, It was focused very much on the family, and in particular the young girl, I forget her name.
Well, that's often the case, though, with poltergeist activity. A lot of people believe that whereas a lot of hauntings are location-based, poltergeist activity does tend to be based more around a person and is often focused around youths, teenagers often.
Yes, and this one seemed to be more, the Black Monk House seemed to be more location specific. There were things that happened to the family, but obviously with the current activity, the family are no longer living there, so it's all about the location, which seems to sort of break the mould for poltergeists.
So it's all very interesting. We watched the YouTube video of UKHaunted investigate it. So yeah, it was a good watch. So shout out to UKHaunted, guys. We'll
put a link in the description for you if you want to have a look at the video.
Yep. Well, I've got to say, one of the things I really loved about that video was they were in the house and, like I said, it's open to investigators now. There's nobody actually living there. So they'd got some, polite notices up on the wall. So they had the ones you would expect, basically, please be respectful of the property, keep the noise to the minimum. But there was one that was a polite notice, absolutely no use of Ouija boards or exorcisms. And I love that is a thing out there in the world, that there is a real live polite notice for no Ouija boarding.
No Ouija boarding.
No Ouija
Denied.
Boarding Denied. So, with that, shall we get straight into our first story?
Yes, let's jump in the bath with Rob.
My first paranormal experience is actually my earliest memory. My mum and I, we were just moving into a new house, and it was my first time there. She showed me all around, and I was really excited, being 3.5 or so. Everything's exciting then. I can remember walking up the stairs and into the bathroom, and as I walked in, on the left-hand side was the bath, and there was a lady standing in the corner. Her legs were passing through the bath, and I can remember she was wearing a red dress. It didn't really strike me as unusual. She just seemed to be part of the house. She was just there, and she was always there in exactly the same position. She never moved. It wasn't really until I was a bit older when I really started to think about it and realised what I'd actually experienced. That was something unexplainable, something paranormal.
Well, that's going to put you off your morning ablutions, isn't it?
It certainly is. I get performance anxiety, so I don't think I could cope with that.
That's not the first thing you want to see in the morning when you go into the bathroom, is it?
Well, especially not if it's not someone you know. I mean, I can see at his age, if your mum's there, you're just going to do your business and crack on. But if there's a lady sort of materialised in your bath...
Yeah, I like the fact that her legs went through the bath, because that sounds like a residual haunting, doesn't it? But it sounds like the bath didn't used to be there.
Well, no, obviously in older houses you had a tub that you'd bring in front of the fire
Absolutely.
and heat up your water and pour it in.
You'd be going to the loo out in the garden.
So it was obviously something from indoor bathrooms.
Yeah, pre-indoor plumbing days. Yeah, that bit was really interesting to me, and I don't know, I thought it was interesting. Like, I think at the time he didn't probably make too much of it.
I was about to say that it's
Yeah.
it's very something that I've thought about. In that, you always said that children are more open to these things, and the fact that he was just like, oh, there's a woman floating in the bath. That's just the way this house is. Being shown round, there's a woman materialised in your bath, and it's just like, oh, that's interesting. That
obviously came with the house.
Yeah, came with the house. Well, obviously it did come with the house.
Well, yeah, clearly it did.
but
I think at 3.5, you would perhaps just not consider that was really abnormal.
Well, no, he's obviously not old enough to realise that that's not the sort of thing that normally happens. But it's just that sort of accepting quality, and is that the reason that children see more or interact more with ghosts? Their brain isn't going, you can't be seeing this.
Yeah, I think that's why you hear so many stories about children with imaginary friends, and then later it turns out that possibly they're not just an imaginary friend, and it's just because that their minds are so open to everything. They're not going to see it as being an abnormal thing.
No,
Still put
something
me
to
off my morning ablutions though. Even if I was 3.5, I think somebody staring at me from the bathtub would be a little off-putting. Interesting.
Well, thanks, Rob. That was short and sweet, but a very interesting snippet of spooky. And speaking of which, I understand you had your own snippet of spooky this month.
Snippet of spooky. Well, yeah, I kind of did. I think. It was odd. Anyway, I was driving to Bedford, and it's kind of it's a deserted sort of windy country road, not a lot of cars around. And I had some music on, and then my car speakers started doing that thing like when you're tuning a radio, when you get the crackle and the hiss and the sort of snatches of sound and the white noise. And so I didn't think anything too much of it to start with. I just thought I was driving through a radio black spot. And then I thought about it, and I didn't actually have the radio playing. It was a CD. So, and it wasn't making that stuttery, like jumping noise that you get with a CD. It wasn't skipping. It was definitely that crackly white noise, kind of snatches of sound radio tuning noise, just like you hear in the horror films.
Creepy.
Just before something particularly ominous happens. So yeah, I mean, there was probably a perfectly plausible explanation for it, but obviously I've watched too many horror films. So then I was expecting to glance in the rearview mirror and see a phantom hitchhiker on my backseat, or possibly the girl from The Ring.
Oh, delightful.
Yes, a little creepy tale to comfort you on your night drives.
Well, radios do seem to be a common theme in supernatural stories. I mean, obviously you've got the sort of tools that a lot of investigators use that are based around it.
Like the spirit box and things like that.
But also you hear lots of stories of voices coming through radios.
You do.
And I have my own short radio story. This was quite a few years ago now when I was still in school. And to show off my geek cred, I was painting some Warhammer miniatures. Yes, I am a geek. I was painting my Warhammer miniatures in a room adjacent to mine, and I left them alone for a while to let the paint dry. Went into my room, was watching some television, and in a quiet point in the programme I was watching, I could hear the stereo in the other room playing, which I thought I'd turned off. So I thought, oh well, yeah, I'll pop over, just turn it off, and then go back to watching my programme. So I get into the room, and the radio is playing. I can't remember what it was playing, wasn't really paying much attention to it, I was just going in to turn it off. So I pick it up, and it's not plugged in.
Oh, what?
Yeah, I mean, it was one of those twin tape deck things that could have batteries.
Like a boombox.
Yes, well, yeah, kind of. So I picked it up, and as I opened the battery compartment, because I was like, I can't ever remember buying batteries for this, when I've got a plug for it.
Yeah.
I opened the back, and as I opened the back, the second I saw that there was no batteries in it, the radio turned off, and it just stopped. Yeah.
That's so creepy.
It was really weird.
How was it doing that? And I've heard that before, actually. from other people that they've had sound, and from televisions and things, that the TV's come on and they've gone to check to think, I've left it on, and it's actually been unplugged. So
Weird.
So creepy.
I'm presuming there's got to be some. You get crystal diode radios that don't require any power, and I'm guessing there's some kind of natural phenomena that could make a TV or a radio crackle or something, even if it's turned off,
like static.
But this was playing.
It was playing music, and that's
It was
just not going
playing
to happen on its own,
playing
is
a
it?
station. I'd love to be able to remember what it was playing in case that was in any way relevant.
Yeah, it might have been significant.
But no, I really wasn't paying attention to it at all. So if somebody was sending me a message, I'm sorry.
You missed it.
Or the message I got was, oh, that was a bit freaky.
Very creepy, very creepy. And talking of creepy, shall we go to our rather creepy premonition stories that came true? The first time I was aware that I had experienced something inexplicable was during my first year at college. One Monday, the students were told that one of the lecturers had to leave work due to illness, but a replacement would be found immediately and our timetable would not be disrupted. By the end of that day, we were informed that our new lecturer would be arriving the next morning, and we were to meet in the studio at 9:30 a.m. That night, I had a dream about the new lecturer, and how he dressed in a very theatrical way. I found it very amusing. On Tuesday morning at 9 a.m, my friend and I went to the studio, and I told her about the dream so that she could share in the amusement. I described a man about 35 years of age, 5'8", with curly red hair and a red beard. The clothes he was wearing were a rather flouncy white shirt with a black waistcoat over it, black trousers with a large leather belt and buckle, tucked into high black leather boots with tops that turned over. I said he looked like a character out of a pantomime. Soon after we had enjoyed joking about my dream, the head of department came into the room and introduced our new lecturer, who he'd just picked up from the railway station. The colour drained from my face, as this man was exactly how I had described the man in my dream. My friend looked at me with her mouth open and asked if I was okay, but I think she had her doubts that it was only a dream. I couldn't take in what this new guy was saying during this introductory meeting, but he obviously noticed I was rather disturbed, and afterwards he came over to speak to me. My friend told him that I'd just described him to her and what he was wearing from a dream I had the previous night. He was perplexed and couldn't believe the accuracy of my description. He then added that he'd only arrived in town that morning and had been collected at the station at about 9 a.m. At that time, my friend and I were already sitting in the studio, so I couldn't possibly have seen him before he walked into the room. The head of department hadn't given us any details of who the new lecturer would be, not even his name, so there was no way I could have known anything about him or even asked anyone else for information. The lecturer invited my friend and I to the pub at lunchtime to talk about my prediction, as he was concerned that I seemed so in shock. He confirmed that there was no way I could have even caught a glimpse of him before he walked into that room. A few years after my dream prediction of the pantomime man, I had a dream which was more like a nightmare. Myself and the man who would later become my husband were students, and we used to spend the weekends at his parents' house. It was a Friday night, and I dreamed that a red car was in a bad accident. It was night, and I could see it scraping along a barrier, damaging the offside. The driver was injured down his right side, but I didn't recognise the young man. There was a red telephone box at the scene of the accident. The following morning, I told my husband about the dream, and I couldn't stop thinking about it, as it was so disturbing. On Saturday evening, my in-laws had gone to bed, and despite being tired, I felt that I should stay up for some reason. My husband felt the same, and so we watched TV until very late. His younger brother had gone out for the night, so we rationalised that we should stay up until he came home, which we would not normally do. At around midnight, the phone rang. It was the police to say my brother-in-law had been in an accident. And could someone take him home as his car was damaged and he was injured, but thankfully not badly considering the state of the car. We arrived at the scene knowing that he had a red car, but just as in my dream, his car was damaged down the offside as it had collided and scraped along a barrier. He was injured down his right side, and there was a red phone box at the scene in the small village. Discussing it later, my husband said it was my insistence we didn't go to bed that made him see I was expecting something to happen. And I did feel at the time that we were waiting for an event to happen, but I hadn't considered a car accident, despite my foreboding dream. You know, I'm often not sure what to make of premonitions, and I know it's so tempting to write things off as coincidence and to think that people like read meaning into things after an event has happened, but with these cases, I mean, the accuracy is just too much to be coincidence. I mean, the detail in those dreams that came true, I mean, that just can't be coincidence, can it?
The first one for me stands out more.
How so?
Well, with the car accident, he was a young man driving a car late at night. He'd been out. It's not out, you know, your insurance premiums are high when you're a young male driver for a reason. Yeah,
but you see, I see where you're coming from, but to know exactly how the car would be damaged and on which side it would be damaged and how the driver would be injured and where he would be injured, and then have that little detail about the red phone box at the scene, I mean, that's...
Oh, don't get me wrong.
That's uncanny.
It's fascinating, and I think it's very interesting.
But why does the first one stand out to you more then?
Because it's just so... what's the word?
Because there's no reason for that to have occurred in her consciousness.
No, this is it. She dreamt about someone, and then the next morning it turns out her lecturer's sick, and there's a new lecturer coming in, and he's dressed in a interesting way. The first thing that came to mind, I think, when she was describing it was Jethro Tull. Admittedly, it was that era. You know, we know who it is and where the stories come from. We know roughly when it was. So it was sort of the 70s era. But even so, that was fairly flamboyant for a lecturer, definitely.
I mean, you think of tweeds when you think of a lecturer, don't you?
Yes, indeed. So it's not the sort of thing that you would expect a common lecturer to wear. And yeah, it's just so accurate, but without there being any sort of underlying...
There's no prompt there, is there? I mean, what possible reason would you have for that, all that information to suddenly pop into your head? Why would you even be thinking about it?
Exactly.
It's not something that would be preying on your mind, is it?
No, and the other thing was with the car accident, she said she didn't recognise the person in the car. You'd have thought if it was her brother-in-law that she would have recognised the person in the car. Yeah. I don't know whether that was just because she didn't see enough to see whether or not it was him or something along those lines. But I can see if you're going from the sceptical, you know, these things are a coincidence thing, you know, you may well worry in the back of your mind that a young person driving a car at night's perhaps going to be in an accident or have a problem or something, but that the lecturer was just so out of the blue and so accurate that...
And I think the two together make a difference as well, because like you say, you could potentially explain away the worry about the car accident. So as a standalone event, that would be more easy to dismiss, but having had those two experiences, one after the other, I think, well, I mean, I don't know, do you think maybe she has a bit of sensitivity?
I don't know. Again, from my sort of sceptical standpoint, I'm not sure what sensitivity means.
No.
But certainly, if they are just coincidences, they're very, very, very out there.
Very uncanny. Very uncannily accurate.
And I'd be intrigued to know if there were any more instances where, one, she was correct about premonition, or whether she had any more that didn't come true, or were any partially accurate.
Do you know what? That's got to be really difficult. I mean, to be honest, I think it must suck if you do have premonitions. That must be, I think, a terrible burden, actually, because, I mean, even if you have an advance warning of something, who's going to believe you so that you can actually do anything to change the outcome? So I think that must be awful. But doubly, if you only have one or two out of the blue, that's got to suck even more, because how do you tell the difference? How do you know that that is the one, that's the dream that's going to become a premonition? There's going to be no forewarning of that, so you can't possibly do anything about it. You've got to think, like, if this is a gift, it kind of sucks.
Ever the optimist. Well, that actually leads us nicely on to our next submission from Mel from Desborough, who had her own premonition.
My one and only paranormal experience was when I was about 6-7 years old. Me and my mum had just moved into an old terrace house, and the people we bought it from, the lady had passed away in her sleep in her bedroom. And there was one day I was just playing in my bedroom and I heard someone call me. Thought it was my mum. Went into her bedroom and there was an old lady sat on the end of her bed, and she looked real. She looked really real. And then my mum called me and she was downstairs, so I went running downstairs and I asked my mum, "Who's the lady in your bedroom?" So my mum went upstairs and she'd gone. And I kept seeing this lady, but it was only ever in my mum's bedroom. I never saw her anywhere else. And then for about 6 weeks, I kept having dreams of flames, nothing else. Literally closed my eyes and all I'd see was just flames. And then at the end of the 6 weeks, I was at school and I got a phone call from my dad telling me he was coming to pick me up. And then my mum met me at my dad's house and took me to mine and my mum's, and the house had burnt down. And my mum took me around the house and everything was black, but I didn't see the lady. And then obviously, because the house had burnt, me and my mum were put up in rented accommodation while the house was being sorted, and all the dreams stopped. And we went back to the house and never saw the lady again.
Just wow, what an amazing experience. I mean, that's a hell of a formative experience.
That was gripping.
It was. And it's odd actually how it kind of echoes the bathtub story, with it being a new house, a new childhood home, and it being the first paranormal experience. And then oddly that it ties in with having a premonition like our other premonition story. And we didn't plan that.
No.
It just kind of happened that way, a bit spookily. But like at first, I thought perhaps the old lady was just there because they'd just moved in, and because it was her house, had been her house. She was just making herself known. But then I've got to wonder, do you think that she just appeared at that time to try and warn them about the fire?
Yeah, this is it. Again, sort of to put my skeptic hat in a corner for a moment, it's a case of, did she start the fire or was she warning them it was going to happen?
No, that crossed my mind as well, actually. But, you had to go and put a negative spin on it, didn't you? I was thinking, I was perfectly happy going with kindly old lady trying to give them a warning, but no, you had to make it sinister. But obviously it sounds like they did move back in afterwards, and she never saw her again. So that would lend, I think, credence to the idea that perhaps it was a warning rather than a negative entity, because I think she probably wouldn't have left them alone after that if it was really that violent kind of a spirit.
I also found it interesting that, like Rob's story, it was the child that saw it and not the parent.
Yeah, it does seem to be a common theme with children, the theory being that children are just more open-minded, so they can see ghosts easier than adults maybe, but all in all, a chilling tale. And thank you so much, Mel, for sending that in. We have some pretty exciting news with regards to sending in stories. We now have a phone number.
We do. You can contact us if you're based in the UK on 01933 746 076. I'll say that again, 01933 746 076. If you're an international caller, it's pretty much the same number. It's +44 1933 746 076. And all you need to do is listen to the instructions and leave a voicemail.
And I believe those calls are just charged at the standard rate, yes?
Yes, they're standard national rate for UK callers, and pretty much the same as any other international call for international callers.
So please get those stories coming in. We cannot wait to hear them. And with that, let's go to our next story, which is a super creepy one about an abandoned old people's home.
Ooh. Okay, so this story takes place perhaps 4 or 5 years ago whilst I was working as a handyman. Most of my work was based around offices or other similar buildings, as I worked in a more commercial sector than private homes. We did occasionally, though, get called to properties that were vacant, and one of the most memorable was an old people's home in quite a posh town in Northamptonshire. The building itself had been vacant for some time following the construction of a newer facility nearby. It was, though, still in quite good condition, other than a roof leak that had been left unrepaired. In the affected area, one corridor had a damp, mossy carpet and some fallen ceilings. Other than that, though, it was pretty much as it was before it closed, just without the furniture. We got called to this particular property twice. On my first visit, I was with a colleague, and we'd been urgently called out as there was an alarm sounding. It was disturbing the neighbours, and so we rushed out. On approaching the building, we could hear the alarm sounding, and it turned out to be the fire alarm. So upon entering the building, we immediately silenced it. Once we'd done this, however, we could still hear some repetitive, buzzing, loud sounds coming from various areas of the building. We quickly realised from the panel above the fire alarm that these were activated call points from what used to be the residents' bedrooms. As an elderly people's home, each bedroom had a call point so that residents could call for help if necessary. They were labelled with a number and a wing of the building, the number being the room number, and the wings were named after flowers, if I recall correctly. So there were several lights labelled along the lines of Rose 2 or Bluebell 4. Not knowing which wings were which, we covered the entire building, resetting each call point as we went. We also checked each fire alarm call point to check for tampering in case that was the cause of the fire alarm. Once we'd searched the entire building, we found that none of the fire alarm call points had been tampered with, and we'd reset all of the bedroom call points. We also believe we'd discovered the cause of both. There was one window broken overlooking a secluded courtyard, and from the number of cigarette butts nearby, we determined that some kids from the local school were using the courtyard as an area to smoke out of sight of their teachers. We assumed that eventually they'd gathered the bravery to break in and fool around, and eventually the smoke from their cigarettes had triggered the fire alarm. As we didn't have any board left on the van, we screwed the windows shut to prevent them gaining access again, swept up the loose glass and taped some cardboard over the window to prevent anyone from cutting themselves on the edges left in the frame. We measured up the broken window and one adjacent to it that was cracked but not broken, and went off to get some board. We didn't get a chance to return that day, but as I had all the measurements, I cut the boards to size back at our workshop, as it was much easier than using a small collapsible workbench and battery tools on site. Unfortunately, my colleague was sick that day, so I returned to do the boarding up on my own. On approaching the building this time, I could just hear from outside one of the call point buzzers going off. Presuming the kids had managed to get into the building again, I opened up and reset the call point. I noticed, however, that the window that we'd covered over the day before was still covered, and it had been done in such a way that the cardboard would have been ripped apart if anyone had tried to remove it. Assuming they'd found another way in, I had a quick check of the building and couldn't find any other access points. So I made a mental note to suggest that an intruder alarm be installed and went back outside to board up the windows, locking the building on my way. The first window was uneventful enough, but as I was raising the board to the window to do the second window, for some reason my focus was drawn to the call point panel inside the room I was boarding up. As I watched, the light on the call panel lit up and the buzzer started sounding. I have never boarded up a window so fast in my life. Luckily, I'd prepped well, the boards were pre-cut and the holes pre-drilled, so all I needed to do was screw through the board and into the wall and walk quickly away. It didn't end there though. As I walked away, I could hear other buzzers paralleling my route going off until I practically ran to the van and drove off. I tried to convince myself that water had gotten into the electrics from the roof damage, but the majority of the triggered buzzers were in different wings to the area with water damage, and the timing of them sounding one after another as I walked outside the building. Following my route was at best uncanny. Needless to say, I never mentioned this to my colleagues, and fortunately, we never got called to the building again. It amused me that you were cowering behind your hands for the tail end of that story.
Well, it was terrifying. I mean, oh my God, if that was me, that window would not have got boarded up. Not in a million years. There would have been tools over the lawn. I would have been out of there running for that van.
Ah, the benefits of preparation, ladies and gentlemen. You can escape quickly from ghosts.
Oh, I wonder, I can see how the fire alarm would have been set off by the youths. But now, after that, I've got to wonder if the call alarm buttons going off was ever something that the youths had set off at all, or whether that was just happening. I mean, by the end of it, the call lights going off one after the other, following him out, that's somebody trying to get your attention, surely. I mean, that's a spirit calling for help. Just like, well, that's what the call buttons were meant for. They were meant to call for help.
Attracting attention, that's actually made my hackles rise when you said that.
I got the goosebumps, man. Something about old people's homes. I mean, you can see why old people's homes, they can be grim places.
They're grim, and more so than any other property than perhaps hospitals, they're a place where people are likely to have passed away.
And maybe got lost. It's really sad, actually, as well as absolutely terrifying.
I'm sticking with terrifying.
Yeah, terrifying. That guy was a better handyman than I'd been. It's a good job he was prepared. That window would have been left open to the elements if that had been me.
You wonder what his colleague would have thought of it if they were there together. Whether it would have been a case of, what do you
think they would have tried to man it out?
I'm intrigued to see if there would have been a man-up competition and whether they both would have run to the van and said, no mention of this to anyone else.
This never happened. We shall never talk of this again.
That was a great story and I really enjoyed reading that. And if you don't fancy recording your own story to send in to us, then please do feel free to send us a written version by email and we will read it out on air for you. And if you want to send in your stories, then please visit our website, knockoncevs.com, and visit our Send Us Your Stories page.
Okay, so that brings us to the part of the show where we delve into your local legends, mysteries, and spooky goings-on. And Fitz, I believe you've got some tales of haunted battlefields for us today.
Indeed. Well, actually, it started off as Haunted Battlefield. I'd been trawling the internet, as I'm wont to do, and I came across an article from our local newspaper from some time ago about a local paranormal group that had taken a picture. And what it appeared to be was a Civil War soldier from the Battle of Naseby.
I've seen this picture. I think it's pretty incredible, actually.
It is an interesting picture. It's one of those that's almost so good that it's not believable, but not quite
really
good
does.
enough to convince everybody that sees it.
I know what you mean. It's the catch-22 of ghost hunting, isn't it? If it's too good, nobody believes you. If it's not good enough, it's passed off as coincidence or whatever. But this, I mean, it really does look like a roundhead soldier in a helmet and a breastplate, carrying something like a pike or some kind of a weapon.
Yeah, it was a really interesting photo. And from there, I started delving around a little bit more and found that after the Battle of Naseby, the local villagers had witnessed repeats of the battle happening in the sky.
In the sky?
In the sky.
That's an odd thing to
It
occur.
is. But even more astoundingly, when I was looking into this, I found out that it wasn't the only Civil War battle that was repeated in the sky.
Really?
There was a battle of Edge Hill, which was the first battle of the English Civil War, and it happened in October of 1642. For those of you that haven't studied your history,
Like me.
the English Civil War was between the Parliamentarians and the Royalists, the Royalists being led by King Charles I. And when they first met in battle, it was at Edge Hill. The Royalist troops were marching from London to Shrewsbury, and the Parliamentarian troops intercepted them at Edge Hill. It was a inconclusive battle, but they both suffered heavy losses. So it was no clear victor, but a
bloody battle.
lot of bloodshed. Very bloody battle. The parliamentarians retreated to Warwick, and the Royalist army marched on towards London, but they only made it as far as Reading before the parliamentarians regrouped. So historically, the battle's been classed as a draw.
Oh, that's unusual.
It was leaning towards a sort of Royalist victory in that they could continue on the march. But anyway, not long afterwards, bearing in mind the battle was in October, it was just before Christmas 1642, some local shepherds saw the battle reenacted in the sky at night.
I just can't get over this seeing it in the sky at night thing. That's so bizarre. That's not what you would expect at all. You'd expect to see it happening on the battlefield.
I know, it is odd that, you hear these stories about, Roman ghosts, and they're walking
Marching
on different
up the Roman
levels,
road
and it happened to
yeah.
be at the same level the original Roman road would have been, blah, blah, blah. Whereas this
Why
is
migrate to
immediately, almost immediately after the battle, and yes, being played out in the sky.
like an actual Sky Plus box.
The original Sky Plus.
Get out here, Marjorie. There's something good on the Sky box tonight. I don't know why I've given them a West Country accent. Warwick's really not that far from here. Anyway, I'll let you get on with the story.
Yes, the Battle of Edge Hill and the Battle of Naseby, both on Sky Plus. So these shepherds reported it to their local priest, and he witnessed it as well. And there were so many sightings from the local population that a pamphlet was produced. Pamphlet was produced called A Great Wonder in Heaven, which described the incidents, and apparently their repetition each weekend for some time.
They replayed every weekend.
Every Saturday and Sunday.
That's bizarre.
Yeah, in the pamphlet it describes how after the first Saturday and Sunday, the Saturday the shepherd saw it, the Sunday the priest saw it, it didn't happen again during the week, so they thought, that was odd, but it's over. And then it happened again on the following weekend, and continued to happen on each following weekend.
Oh, bizarre.
Yeah, so the king heard about this and dispatched a royal commission, which consisted of a Colonel Lewis Kirk, a Captain Dudley, a Captain Wayne Mao, I'm not sure I've pronounced that correctly, and 3 other unnamed persons who also witnessed the events, and they were even able to identify some of the participants in the battle.
So they recognised people in the sky?
Yes, in particular they recognised Sir Edmund Verney, who was a personal favourite of the king.
And did they know he'd died in the battle?
I'm not sure I'm presuming if he died in the battle they knew about it.
Well, yeah.
I'm afraid I don't have an injury tally.
If anybody knows the answer, do write.
Yes. So interestingly, that carried on for pretty much every weekend until the locals buried the remaining soldiers left on the battlefield.
Oh, what? Hold up there. They'd just left the dead soldiers on the battlefield, just strewn around, and they'd never given them a proper burial.
Yeah, apparently this went on for a couple of months until they went out and gave all the remaining soldiers a proper burial.
So I wonder if that was the whole point of this battle being replayed in the sky.
Well, you say that, but bearing in mind that the Edge Hill battle in the sky has been given the distinction of being officially recognised due to the Royal Commission attending.
Oh my goodness. So it's actually officially by the King recognised as a haunting?
Yes.
Has that ever happened before?
No, and it hasn't happened since. Frustratingly, the same, obviously, Sky Plus battles happened at Naseby, and Naseby was near the end of the Civil War. It was pretty much the deciding battle of the war. There were reports that the Royalists suffered 6,000 casualties out of 7,500 fielded soldiers. So it was pretty decimating for the Royalists. There were other battles throughout the course of the Civil War, but they were pretty much skirmishes. He never fielded such an impressive army again. And like Edge Hill, we have the Sky Plus battles, But apparently, the locals witnessed these battles, normally on the anniversary. So it wasn't every weekend, it was more annual. But for over 100 years.
Really? Well, I mean, I know for Naseby for sure, I know people have been out there, from our generation, and investigated on the anniversary of the battle, and they have caught the sound of cannon fire and gunshots and screaming, and there's quite a few documented stories of people seeing soldiers there as well. I think there was one in the 50s.
Yes, there was a couple taking a rest from cycling in the area in 1949 who saw a group of dishevelled Civil War soldiers in Civil War attire vanish in front of them. And the report of the local ghost hunting group I was talking about earlier in 2008, I believe they heard the sound of clunking metal and cannon fire when they captured the image of their soldier.
So do we have any more recent reports from Edge Hill?
Not as far as I'm aware.
Or did that all completely clear up when they buried the bodies?
From what I can gather, it cleared up after the bodies were buried, but I believe the site is now MOD land and it's quite
so it's
difficult to get to.
Been investigated anyway.
So yeah, I had a look, and there's various paths you can walk around the battle site, and there's certain places you can look over the battlefield from certain vantage points, but I don't think you can actually go down
Can't
there.
Access it like you could do Naseby.
No, I don't think the access is anywhere near like Naseby, where it's all open field and pretty much you can get anywhere. So it may just be the fact that there haven't been enough people around to witness it.
But I like that sort of, it's quite poignant actually, the fact that it continued until the bodies were buried. I mean, that's dreadful, having just left the bodies strewn around the battlefield like that.
Yeah, and well, they just, we're going to keep pestering you until you...
Yeah, until you bury us and give us closure.
But that obviously wasn't the case at Naseby.
No.
They carried on for 100-odd years.
But then you do get an awful lot of haunted battlefield stories, not just from the Civil War, obviously, because there's with so much bloodshed and so much emotion and such a traumatic, bloody event like that. I mean, it is, you can understand why it would leave an impression.
It does seem also that a lot of them, like these battles, tend to play out in the sky. There's been quite a few reports I've seen where there's been a replay of a battle and it's been in the sky. It doesn't seem as usual for them to happen at ground level.
That's so strange. I can't get my head around that at all.
I can't think of any reason why that would be the case.
No!
It seems so strange. I mean, there's reports, I'm terribly sorry, I can't remember where it was, but there was reports of a Civil War skirmish that was witnessed later, but that, as far as I'm aware, was at ground level.
As you'd expect.
The larger battles tend to be elevated.
Wow, that's really interesting.
And I would love very much, because Naseby's not very far from here, to perhaps pop out and do our own little investigation.
I think we may have to do that possibly on the anniversary of the battle.
Yes, the anniversary is June the 14th, so hopefully the weather will be good as well.
Can't bank on it, this is England.
So yes, I know that there have been some other investigations by other groups, and I'm going to have a look and see if there is anyone holding any events, because I don't want to just sort of turn up and barge in on somebody else's.
Hi.
But if somebody is planning something, we'd love to get involved.
Absolutely.
And that brings us to the end of episode 2.
It does, sadly, but thank you so much to everybody that sent in stories for this episode. We have loved hearing them, and if you've got a story you'd like to share with us, there are lots of ways to get in touch.
Indeed, I was telling you earlier about our brand new phone line. I'll just repeat the telephone number for you. For those in the UK, it's 01933 746 076. International callers can reach us on +44 1933 746 076, and standard call charges will apply. You can also reach us through submitting a story in writing, or by sending us an MP3 or other audio file, and you can do that by contacting us through our website, which is knockonceforyes.com/send us your stories. That'll also give you some tips on what to do if you're submitting an audio file, or if you're quite happy for us to read out your story, you can just send in a text or Word file and we'll read it out on air for you.
And just get in touch with us, basically. We want to really build a little bit of a paranormal community around the show if we can, so we'd just love to hear from you. Get interacting with us on the Twitters and the Facebooks.
Yes, we do even have a forum where any written stories are put up online, and we would love for you to provide some comments on those and our blogs. Every time you communicate with us, whether it's a comment, a like or a share, it really does help our exposure. We get to reach more people, and that means we've got a better chance of bringing in more stories and making a better show out of it.
More shares means better stories, people. Oh, and with that in mind, we are currently planning for our super spangly extra special Christmas bumper episode. So please, if you've got any creepy Christmas stories, well, or otherwise, doesn't have to be Christmas stories, but it would be great if we could get some festive, spooky tales in.
Yes, creepy Christmas.
Creepy Christmas.
Horrible Hanukkah.
It's horrible Hanukkah. It's going to be an awesome episode.
Crazy
There's going to be a quiz and party hats. It's going to be amazing. Cannot wait.
Looking forward to that.
And on that note, thanks for listening. We hope you'll join us for episode 3.
EVP session end.